Chapter 47, verse 1, Joseph went in and told Pharaoh, "My father and my brothers have come, and they are in the land of Goshen." You see, Joseph, though he had such authority in Egypt that he could have just allotted land to his brothers and said, "Well, you're going to take Goshen, that's all." But you see something there, that Joseph will not do something without Pharaoh's permission. He's not going to show any partiality to his brothers. He's not going to show some partiality to his family, like a lot of people in high positions do. No, he let Pharaoh allot whatever land Pharaoh decides. When it came to other people, Joseph had authority. He could have done it for his brothers, and Pharaoh wouldn't have questioned him. Nobody would have questioned him. But he submits to authority. He submitted to the authority of Pharaoh. He said, "My brothers have come, and please allot them some land." And Pharaoh asked them, "What is your occupation?" And they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, both we and our fathers." And they said to Pharaoh, "We have come to sojourn in the land. Please let your servants live in the land of Goshen." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is at your disposal." Verse 6. "Settle your brother in the best of the land. Let them live in the land of Goshen. And if you know any capable men among them, put them in charge of my livestock." You see, I believe there's something we can learn there also from Joseph's life, that when some tremendous authority is given into our hands, that we don't take advantage of it for our personal benefit, to benefit our family in some way. There we see Joseph as a man who has tremendous power, and he's totally free from corruption. He does not use it to benefit his own family. He does not quietly allot the land of Goshen. He goes and brings his brothers before Pharaoh and says, "You allot the land, because in this case this is my family. I don't want to allot it." That's really something we can learn. I'm not surprised that God sent such a man who had been trained by God in adversity and trial and discipline, tested in righteousness, in area after area after area, and every time you see Joseph shining with a crystal clear character, never seeking personal gain. That is the type of man God sends, the man who will not seek to use his position in the world or in the church or anywhere to benefit his family personally, but will let God do it, will submit to authority and not seek his own. And of course they get the best. God always honors those who honor him. And Joseph brings his aged father, Jacob, before Pharaoh. He's not ashamed of his aged father. That's a man, again, you see, who honors his father. He brings his father to Pharaoh. He says, "This is my father." And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many years have you lived?" And Pharaoh says to Jacob, "How many years have you lived?" And Jacob says, "The years of my sojourning are 130. Few and unpleasant," verse 9, "have been the years of my life." But it's those unpleasant experiences that he had that made him into an Israel. In other words, he didn't have a cushy, comfortable life. Jacob became an Israel because his years were difficult years. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. This man who had been under God's discipline finally blesses the world's greatest monarch. Think what God can do with a man who is broken. And so Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had ordered. He didn't take that himself, as Pharaoh had ordered. And Joseph provided for his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food. He rewarded them good for all the evil that his brothers had done. There was no food in the land of Egypt because the famine was severe, and the people had finally paid up all the money buying grain, and finally, verse 15, they had spent all their money. And then the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Our money is gone." Now give us food. So Joseph said, give up your livestock, and I'll give you food if you give me your cattle now that you don't have money. And so they brought their cattle, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses and the flocks and the herds and the donkeys. And he fed them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. Verse 18, and when that year is ended, their money was spent and their livestock had also been sold, and they said to Joseph, nothing is left for my Lord except our bodies and our land. So we'll sell ourselves as slaves and our land also. Joseph bought, verse 20, all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. There again we see a total freedom from corruption. He did not take anything for himself. He was so upright. All that land, he didn't just write off some of that land in his name and Pharaoh would never have known about it. He did not do it. Not one thing in his name. He bought it all for Pharaoh. A faithful man who would not take advantage of his position for himself in any way. There are very, very few people like this. Very few. Who will never take advantage of their position in any way to gain something for themselves. And we see the world is full of people who use their position to get some benefit for themselves, even in the church. In Christendom anyway. And there we praise God that God can raise up a testimony in the church of people who are quite different from that, like Joseph. And thus the land became Pharaoh's, and as for the people, he moved them to the cities. Only the land of the priests he didn't buy, because they lived off an allotment Pharaoh gave them. Then Joseph said to the people, I have bought you and your land for Pharaoh now, and here is seed, that you may sow the land. And at the harvest, verse 24, you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh. Everything is for Pharaoh. 4/5 will be for your own seed and for your food. They were so grateful to this man. You see, you've saved our lives. Let's find favor in the sight of my Lord. And Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, valid unto this day, that Pharaoh should have the 5th, and only the land of the priests did not become Pharaoh's. Now, notice here the wisdom that God gave to Joseph to administer this whole land single-handed. Wisdom to know what to do when this happens and what to do, and yet, though he bought these people to be slaves, they were not bitter against him. Which shows what a good attitude he had to these people, that they were so grateful to him. At the end of it all, they said, you've saved our lives. That's really something that struck me, how God could give a man like this administrative wisdom at the age of 30. And that's in the Old Testament. We don't have to wait till we are 70 years old. You can have wisdom, my brother, sister, when you're 30 years old. Wisdom, practical wisdom. This is not just spiritual wisdom. He had spiritual wisdom too. We know he had spiritual wisdom because he forgave his brothers. That's spiritual wisdom. We know that he gave the best to those who gave the worst to him. That's spiritual wisdom. But he also had practical wisdom in the ordinary affairs of earthly life. That's also something that God needs to give us. Practical wisdom in dealing with people, in dealing with difficult situations, in handling it. God can give it. If we seek Him, if we are faithful, He can give us wisdom for the practical situations of life when you're 30 years old. When I see the number of young brothers and sisters who go around making fools of themselves continuously, I say, Joseph could have made a fool of himself too. Well, he didn't. How is it that this man didn't make a fool of himself? How is it that with all the responsibility that he had and all the things he had to do, he did it so wisely and he didn't make a fool of himself? That's a challenge to you, young brothers and sisters. That you can live such a life that you command respect from others even at the age of 30. If you are faithful in your private life, that's the secret. It It's when you're not faithful in your private life that God allows you to just make a fool of yourself. That's all. That's a proof that you're not faithful in your private life. That proves that you don't fear God. Proves that you're not humble, particularly humble. Where God sees that any of us think too much of ourselves, He just allows us to do something so stupid. If we have ears to hear what God is saying to us at such times, you are too high in your own thoughts. That's why. My dear brothers and sisters, it is the will of God that the younger ones, particularly I'm speaking about from your teenage years, it's so easy for you to do such a lot of foolish things. It's possible for you to grow up in the church so that by the time you're 30, people in the church respect you, really respect you as a brother or a sister whom God has sent to be a blessing in the church. That's the challenge I want to present to every one of you young brothers and sisters in your teens and who are in your 20s. That by the time you're 30, let people in the church respect you. They respect you for what you have to say in the meetings. They respect you because they see the way you conduct yourself. They respect you because they see the wisdom you have, spiritual and in practical matters. How shall you have it? Humble yourself. Go down in your own eyes. Be faithful and fear God in secret. And God will raise you up like He did Joseph. If He did that for someone in the Old Covenant, won't He do much more for us? Sure. That is the will of God. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Humility and the fear of God are the secret to be saved from all folly and submission to authority. Joseph had that. Humility, the fear of God, and submission to authority. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Now Israel, verse 27, lived in the land of Egypt in Goshen, and they acquired property in it and were fruitful and became very numerous. And he lived 17 years there, and the time for him to die drew near, and he called his son Joseph and said, "Please don't bury me in Egypt. When I lie down with my fathers, you must carry me and bury me in their burial place in Canaan. Swear to me." Verse 31. So he swore to him, and Israel bowed in worship at the head of the bed. So there we see Jacob's faith that I will go back. God will give the land of Canaan to my seed. Egypt is a beautiful place. It's a lovely place, very advanced culturally, educationally, and all that. Beautiful sights here to see, but my home is there. Here was a man who knew that God had promised Canaan, and he said, "Bury me way back there." A testimony on his deathbed that my home is not here. He was broken. There was a time earlier on in his life when he was seeking for money and prosperity and all that, but not now. He's a broken man, and he longs for that inheritance which God has reserved for him. That's how we are to live in this world. We look around and see so many things, and we say, "This world's not my home. My home is somewhere else." So we'll close there and ask God for grace that we can have in our lives those qualities that we have seen in these characters we've seen in Scripture.